episode 404 of Global from Asia. We are going where you're treated best. Andrew Henderson, Nomad Capitalist. This is a great one about cross-border business and tax, fun stuff. Let's do this.
Welcome to the Global from Asia podcast, where the daunting process of running an international business is broken down into straight up actionable advice. And now, your host, Michael Michelini.
Thank you so much for choosing to listen to or watch this show. And I am in my studio office. I think I'll show you right now. I'm using a tripod today. If you're watching, I know a lot still listen, but you can see I got the background for the Web3 handshake stuff. We did some shows, of course, the cross-border summit here. I got all these samples of different products and brands we're working on, and various studio stuff, and the balcony. So, just showing you a little bit of a 360 of the studio here. Let me sit back down. And, we did this as a live webinar with Andrew Henderson. He's been at our Cross-Border Summit pre-COVID. He's supporting the Cross-Border Summit again this time, getting somebody from his team comment. Also, he's doing the Nomad Capitalist live event before Cross-Border Summit, which will be September 6th to the 9th in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I'll be going. I'm excited for that. And today we show you the recording from this live webinar. I had a lot of fun. If you're on our email list, you should get this invite or following our social media. We had a lot of fun discussions. I know fun in taxes doesn't sound like it, but Andrew knows so many different things and he shares a lot of different insights. So we bring him on today, and you can see me there. It'll be a video. He did have slides, but I think if you're listening in audio only, you'll be fine to hear it because he's speaking what he's talking about, and you'll be able to follow along fine in the audio version. So let's tune into this show, episode 404 of Global from Asia, and let's dive in. All right, we have Tommy, the sales manager at CrossBetter Logistics. How are you, Tommy?
Hi, everyone.
We just got to meet here in Shenzhen, China. It's great. They support the show at Global from Asia, and we also use them ourselves for many of our brands and e-commerce businesses. And Tommy really cares. They always are trying to help us save money. You have some products you keep for us in China. You have some products you keep for us in the U.S. warehouse, and I really appreciate that. And you can talk to this seller, right? You can give them your advice. You work with many Chinese sellers a lot, right? And you can help the sellers understand more.
Yeah, we are very professional for the shipment to USA and Canada. Also, we have warehouse in USA and Canada. We can help our factories, suppliers, sellers for the shipment.
Yes.
Yeah, for the e-commerce business.
Yep, and you even keep stuff in China too. So sometimes if you have the limitations of sending too much to Amazon, you can keep it here in China with CrossBetter, or you can send, of course, to the U.S. warehouse. They have many different options, and they're always trying their best to find out what's the best solution for you. So Definitely talk to Tommy, talk to CrossBetter, and thank you for your support of the community.
Yes, we have good pricing and better service.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, how's everybody doing? Can you hear me? Put a little one where you're dialing in from, or what time it is where you are. I hope the time works for everybody. Andrew, you're in the Europe time. I don't know if I could say your location. You're in Ireland, right?
I'm in Istanbul.
Istanbul. Whoa, so exotic. That's exotic.
Exciting time. Yeah, good to be with you here. So I'm sure we got people from all over Asia, and
yeah, there's a few in Thailand. I think there's some in Europe too. I see Andrew here, Austin, Shane.
Oh wow,
some regulars. How's everybody doing? And Sally's here in the back in the community management. Okay, great. Joan doing good. Okay. So tax planning. All right.
Sounds exciting. Well, we're going to make it exciting.
It is. I like to go where you're treated best. That's your slogan, man. I'm a fan. You're also supporting the Cross-Border Summit. Appreciate it. You've spoken there in the past, and representing for us this year. And you have a great event coming up too in September, which is going to be awesome. But go where you're treated best. I always think about that. I always think about your book and your experiences, and you're always your post. You're always looking for where it's not what like, what's that saying from like Rome? It's not what you, or is it a Gladiator movie or Braveheart? Like, you think Mel Gibson says, you think you exist to the people exist to serve you, to the politicians.
Right.
Homer Simpson. But I think you exist to serve the people, right? But like these governments and politicians, they think that we are like stuck in their system, and we are like, but we are customers of that country, right? As an individual, as a citizen, we're a customer, and they need to serve us and attract us, right? That's the way.
I think that's what we talk about, right? And so I figured we'd have maybe 45 minutes of going through a handful of slides and sharing what's happening on how you can go where you're treated best, because I think, to your community, to this, cross-border community, there are so many opportunities to choose the place that serves you best. I am spending, I've spent time in Asia. I continue to have a presence in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. For me, I found that to meet some people to kind of go to the next level, I wanted to be in a kind of native English speaking country. And so I've chosen to spend some time in Ireland. They have a great program in Ireland for foreigners where you're going to pay more tax than you might in Malaysia, but you're going to pay, a lot less percentage if you're a successful person. You're going to pay basically on only part of your income that you spend in Ireland. And so you can kind of arbitrage it, because I think that they in the UK and Malta and Cyprus and countries that have that kind of tax system, that's a remittance-based tax system, realized if you're from Ireland, all right, we're going to stick it to you. You're going to pay 52%. But if you're not, historically, the logic was, let's have a reason for people to come here and be competitive, right? If I had to pay 52% tax on everything I made by living in Ireland, I wouldn't go to Ireland. Instead, I can go there. I can spend money. I can, we're hiring 10 people there perhaps for sales and marketing. And we'll get into that today. I think. Where are they attracting you, right? I mean, I think that there's places where they think, oh, well, you should just come here because. I mean, there's so many options these days. And if you live in Thailand, you probably wouldn't have lived in Thailand 30 years ago. Like, your parents would not have probably thought that was a place that could be lived in. Now it can be. So are the countries keeping up, and where are you going?
Makes sense. Great. We got a good turnout. So do you want questions? I mean, they can't do voice, but they can, of course, text questions. Do you want me to collect them for the end, or would you want, I'll hang out here, Andrew, and
I think maybe I'd like to go through 6 or 7 slides and spend 40 minutes going through some issues, I think, at a surface level. I mean, we could probably spend 3 days. And actually, as you mentioned,
that's true.
We're having a live event where it's 4 days. And unlike any other, I think your event's pretty solid. But I mean, unlike most of the events I go to, our live event is like, I think one day is 8 a.m. to 11 p.m.
Wow.
Of speakers. I mean, with a few breaks, but not like 3-hour long breaks. It's solid. And so that's where we talk about how to do all this stuff. And we'll talk about that maybe for 5 or 10 minutes at the end. I know you have a special deal for your folks. But I just wanted to spend 40 minutes kind of talking about the stuff that we do that might be of interest, pure information. Spend 5 or 10 minutes talking about some things people can take advantage of, and then take a couple of questions that we can accrue over the session if that works for you.
Great. So the audience can use the FAQ section. Q&A will be easier for everybody, and then it will keep track, but I'll try to help if not. But Andrew, take it away. I can't wait to hear this myself.
Basically, I want to cover these things. Challenges we're facing. I think to an entrepreneurial audience like this one, we'll spend a little bit less time on that. I think we know what those are, and we know we can push through those things. Actionable tactics you can use to start protecting and growing your wealth, keeping more of your wealth. Some people call it the New World Order. Maybe some of that has a kind of conspiratorial element. To me, the New World Order is very simple. You guys are part of it. You're sourcing stuff in Asia. Obviously, Mexico is becoming a big place for sourcing stuff now. I'm looking at countries like Indonesia is playing a much bigger role. If you look at the economic rankings, let's say, I think it was 2033 and 2038, you're going to see countries like Indonesia, Nigeria, Brazil, China, India moving up the ranks. We all perhaps have experience with those places, but the average person doesn't. And you're seeing, for example, since the turn of the century, the amount of the world reserves that were in US dollars have gone down by about 15 percentage points, from 70 73, I think, to 56, or 71 to 56. The US dollar, the United States, is not going away, but I think you're going to see the places where some of the people here are doing business, sourcing, living, are going to play a bigger role. And that's going to eat at the margins away from the power in the West. And that's why I think that having a plan, if you're from the West, protect yourself is a good idea. I took some flack for this, but I stand by it. My interpretation of what's happening in Australia is they're going to start really trying to rope more people who don't live there into their tax system. And that if you're living a digital nomad lifestyle, they are turning the screws to make it harder for you to not pay tax in Australia. It's not quite what the United States does to its citizens, but I think that as these countries have marginal declines in tax revenue and things like that from people like us who go somewhere else where we're shopping around for the best deal, they're going to make it harder to leave. And so I left the United States many years ago. I gave up my citizenship for a number of reasons. You don't have to go to that extreme, but I think that that could be something, some version of that could be something that's worth doing if you're from the West, because when they start to lose a percentage point here, a percentage point there, as you've seen with the US dollar, for example, I imagine that they'll just make it harder to diversify overseas. We'll talk about integration. We'll talk about tax savings. So obviously, a couple of quick challenges. Some of you may have seen kind of flag theory that I think we've modernized at Nomad Capitalist, being reliant on just one government. During COVID, Mike and I were talking about this before the session. If you had a US passport, you weren't going anywhere. If you had an Australian passport, you weren't leaving and you weren't going home. That to me is a problem. And it's in some cases against like what the UN, everyone agreed to. So if you're just reliant on one passport, one bank account, had a guy recently had all of his money frozen. It took him 6 months to get it unfrozen, but he couldn't even defend himself in that time. A passport you have, we had a guy who got a bunch of different weird passports, including some in the Caribbean, just people to travel and do his work in Asia, because the US and some of the, like in Malaysia, I think it's like, if the number of COVID cases in your country is too high, you can't come here. Well, obviously there's going to be fewer COVID cases in St. Lucia than the United States. So he was going and getting these different passports. And he found even though 5 of them could get into South Korea, where he had some business, only 1 was actually allowed into South Korea during COVID. So having multiple passports could be a good thing to talk about if you're in business and you need to do business. I do think tax rates go up. I do think that CBT, which is what's called citizenship-based taxation, if you're an American, you're taxed no matter where you live. Now, if you've got a foreign spouse, if you've got a foreign business partner, you may be able to reduce that tax down to 0 if you're a business owner. You may be able to reduce it down to the single or low double digits if you're not a business owner. When I see people doing business in Asia, living in Asia, and they're still working from a US C Corp or US LLC, I shudder. You want to have your structure overseas if you're overseas, but still where you're from is potentially an issue if your country taxes you, or if Australia now says, hey, you got to really live in one place and be a tax resident there. Even if you don't come back to Australia, we're going to start looking very unpleasantly at somebody who's all over the place. So that's an issue. Diversification is important. Again, maybe this doesn't apply to this audience, but I think that most people don't want to leave as long as, I think it should say, things are good. We had people in Canada who were freaking out last year about what was happening there, where they were freezing people's accounts. And by the time it came to deliver or to execute on the solutions that we put together in the course of 3 to 4 weeks, they felt better about it. I think it's kind of like, if you're in a relationship and your partner, punches you in the face, it's probably not going to get better. Like that's going to happen again. And I think the same thing applies with countries, which is why you don't want to be reliant on just one. So those are some of the issues we'll talk about. I do think when it comes to having a citizenship, this is going to be a fulcrum, not for people who are necessarily from non-Western countries, but for people who are from Western countries. So the US, again, if you run a business, you can reduce your taxes to 0, 5, 10, 12%, whatever it may be. Now, you're going to have restrictions on how you spent the money. So when I gave up US citizenship, I did not do it for this reason, but suddenly I was able to access a lot of money that was tied up in my companies. And so I went out and, bought a few pieces of real estate and built some diversification that would have been much more difficult as an American. If you buy a property in Turkey, you're supposed to buy it in your own name generally. You shouldn't buy it in a corporate structure. But that's what I would have had to do if I were an American. So, being out of the US tax system allowed me to take more money to my company and have more control, even though I was legally paying nothing for all those years, or very close to nothing, because I didn't live in the United States at all. The citizenship dictated how I made investments. I still have a property in Malaysia that nobody understands why it's owned by a foreign company. And it's like a lot of hassle every year, but it was done for US tax planning. And if I want to move it to a different, if I want to move it to my own name, it's going to cost like $10,000 and a lot of paperwork and a lot of hassles. And you got to pay a lawyer $4,000. And it's just like, all right, leave it there and have the finance team be confused every year. So I think that, we see Australia being more aggressive on what you need to do in order to exit their tax system if you've lived there. Again, reasonable minds can disagree, but I think that all of our tax professionals say if you're going to be a digital nomad, it's going to be hard to be out of the Australian tax net. I think Canada has made rumors in that same direction. The UK, not as much. Ireland, not as much, because they've got a history of emigration. But these kind of further flung, more isolated countries like US and Canada, not a lot of neighbors. Australia, New Zealand, not a lot of neighbors, have really talked about, if you leave, we want to still tax you. Or in the US, we want to still regulate you, who you can do business with. What if you saw like TikTok? Trump wanted to make them sell it to an American company. What happens when you go past Nigeria? What's that?
I think it was Microsoft, maybe, to sell.
And Walmart, I think, or something.
Yeah, they're all jumping at buying TikTok US. Yeah.
So it's like, do I want to be an American if I'm doing business in Asia, where I think some countries like Malaysia have said, we were an ally of the US, but what have they done for us? Remember, the old prime minister was like, what have they done for us? And then they just come and lecture us. I don't know that I want to be an American if I'm in Asia. I'd like to have another passport that I can have my residence on. It's obviously very hard if you're not from Asia to be an Asian citizen. I'd rather be like St. Lucian in Asia. They're like, all right, cool, whatever. Or if I could be, even if I had like, if I had a grandparent from Ireland and I could become an Irish citizen, I'd rather be that than American or British or Australian, where it's like these wars and the geopolitics. I think it could be an issue.
Yeah, like they sent extra $6 billion or whatever to Ukraine, I heard, in the US, something like that.
That's what I mean.
1 billion.
I don't want to do the New World Order like a conspiracy thing, but if you look at, I sat next to a guy from India on a plane, I don't know, 6-9 months ago. He was like so anti-Ukraine, so pro-Russia. And I think whether you like it or not, that's a good chunk of the world. Either he's that or they don't care. This idea that we live in the Western bubble, whether we live there or whether we just consume Western media, we hear certain things. That's a very small percentage of the world's population. Again, what you are doing in Asia, it's a huge population there that is maybe opposed to the West. So if I've got a Western passport for geopolitical reasons, for business reasons, for travel reasons during a pandemic, for these trade issues that people get into as the Western countries become more nationalistic and try and push back, or just because I think that my Western country, as they lose some power, is going to want to start taxing me, even if I don't live there, I would consider having another passport. I think 3 is kind of like ideal. If you can get 2, that's kind of like having 1, because there may come a time when 1 is an actual hindrance on you. If you're willing to move to Asia, that's not going to be very good for getting a passport. Singapore, I don't know a single person who's been naturalized there. It's really hard. Most of the other countries don't allow dual citizenships. That's kind of like stepping from one frying pan to the other. I guess Cambodia has a citizenship scheme, but that's probably not going to be, I guess that could be your backup passport for working within Southeast Asia. And if that's all you wanted, I know a guy who did that. But that's probably not going to it's not going to replace your Western passport for traveling. So if you're willing to move to Europe, Ireland's a good tax-friendly place to live. You already speak the language if you're here. 5 years. I think they actually deliver on that 5 years, unlike countries like Malta, where they say it's 5 years and it's really 18. So Ireland's a tax-friendly, English-speaking place to live, where if you wanted to employ yourself and one other person, or if you're a European citizen, you could just move there. You could work towards getting that citizenship. They allow dual. It's a nice place to be. But it's a commitment. It's 9 months a year, maybe with a few exceptions for travel. If you're willing to move to Latin America and speak Spanish, they're pretty easy. The easier thing, if you have the funds, is just, go the route that I did. You can get Caribbean citizenship starting from $100,000. No need to move there. They are introducing an interview requirement, so they're putting some more roadblocks, which to me shows exactly what we said. The U.S. went down and bullied them and said, you need to interview people first. Some of these options are going to become less and less available because I think that the U.S., is leading a contingent of Western countries that's tired of people having options. I think that's pretty clear in their communications. So, I would look at that as something to do now if I had $100,000 in change to spare. If I wanted to buy a property, you said it's kind of exotic to be in Turkey. It's now $400,000. You buy a property. Erdogan got reelected, so they're going to keep doing it. You buy a property for 400. You keep it for 3 years. You resell it, and you keep your citizenship. It's not going to replace a Western passport, but they're neutral, for example, in Ukraine versus Russia. They're not going to have any ability to tax people from their country no matter where they live. They don't really care, So I think that Turkey is something for certain people who are doing business in the East. I mean, Turkey is a great passport for Asia, better than almost any other. You can go to Thailand visa-free. You can go over to Japan visa-free. It's just not as good with the West. But if you're here and your business is in Asia, I would look at a Turkish passport if you have money to invest in real estate. So you're not really spending a lot. I mean, what we do for our clients is find properties that are at market value. If you buy a condo that they're advertising at the airport, you're probably going to lose half your money when you go to resell it. But if you buy a resale property, it's not from a developer, and you know the right people, you can probably get it pretty close. And my property in about 2.5 years, has gone up 30% or something in dollar terms, not in lira terms, but in dollar terms. In lira terms, it's like 4x. And If you want, you can get citizenship for you and your entire family. Something like if you didn't want to change your lifestyle, if you want to live in Asia, keep your American, Australian, European passport, whatever. Look at something like Caribbean passport by investment. You can read about that on our website, nomadcapitalist.com. Turkey would be another one that I think is very Asia friendly. Now you got 3. Now you've got a big, strong country. You've got a very small, tiny country that's tax friendly. And you've got your Western country that who knows what they're going to do to you. If you want to move, I like Ireland. Argentina, I guess, could work. That's a little weird. It's not that tax friendly. So we could go into this all day, but those are some considerations. Does that make sense, Mike?
Definitely. No, this is really great. So it's Turkey 400K real estate. Do we have to live there? And you said the whole family could.
We had a billionaire who hired us. He's like, listen, every time I get on my jet, it costs me $300,000. So I'm doing everything power of attorney. I said, okay. I don't think he's ever been to Turkey.
Oh, okay.
Most people come to choose the property. You can come for 2 or 3 days. Around.
It's a nice place. I heard it's great. I've never been, but I've heard it's great.
I love it. And by the way, if you're in Europe or the US or wherever, and you're also in Asia, for me, I think Turkish Airlines is the best. And so if I'm going from Bogota to Kuala Lumpur, I fly through Istanbul, one stop, and I'll hang out for a couple of days and take the heat off of a 30-hour flight, right? Do some shopping on the cheap, whatever.
Okay.
So I think I would look at, if I'm a Westerner, this historical thing has been, I have the best passport. I've got a great passport. Now, the American passport on our Nomad Passport Index was like number 40 this year. Not terrible, out of 200, but not number 1 because of some of those restrictions. I think you'll see more of the big Western countries having restrictions. I'd want to have another passport. If I'm going to move, I'm big on Ireland right now because they're the one that delivers on their promises. And there's not a lot of, it's close to home. There's plenty of wealthy people you can network with. There's business opportunities. It's easy enough to get in, and they honor their word. And it's the one EU passport you can still live in the UK with. Latin America, if you want to do that, you're learning a new language. If you don't want to move, or if you want to move to Asia, where you're not going to probably get naturalized, then I would go to my financial strategy of Caribbean citizenship plus or Turkey. I would not do Vanuatu unless I'm like a criminal or something. They've got a passport program. I wouldn't do that.
I never even heard of that. That's a country, Vanuatu.
Vanuatu is in the South Pacific. If you're from Australia or New Zealand, you probably, it's 2 or 3 hours away.
Vanuatu.
Yeah. That was like shorthand in my house growing up for like a place that was really far away. You went to Vanuatu.
Interesting. I always remember, Tanzania. No.
Well, that's easy compared to Vanuatu. Who's here from Australia? There must be some Australians here.
I see one Q&A. Joan, she says she's from Australia. She's asking, and she doesn't seem to know about her taxation thing. There's a couple that is clarifying about what you're saying, but yeah, there's at least a couple here from Australia. I think Shane. I don't want to call people out, but I know some people.
We put a video on our YouTube channel a couple of weeks ago, and of course, as with all things tax, somebody said no. people said, oh, he's talking about something that's existed for years. They changed the rules on June 7th. Now, technically, the rules are how you're supposed to file, and if you want to sue it's complicated stuff. But like, basically, if you just want your life to be easy, and if you just don't want to avoid hassles and lawsuits with the tax man, Australia has basically unified some rules to where people who have no proper tax home somewhere else are going to be more easy to drag into the Australian tax net. And so I said that's a form of citizenship-based taxation, in the sense of if you don't live the way, if you don't leave the way they want you to leave, they may still tax you in Australia. So for me, I never went back to the US. There were the years I was there 0 days, and yet I still had to pay. Australia, if you're going to say, I'm moving to Singapore and I'm living in Singapore, you'll find me there, then yes, you'll still be off the hook. But if you're going to be like, I want to go here and then go there and go here, and I don't know, I don't really pay taxes anywhere, Australia has tightened the noose on, okay, we'll tax you. It used to be, all right, you're never really here. All right, fine. At some point, all right, we give up. And now they're like, well, no, like if you're not paying somewhere that you actually live, we should tax you. Will that change? Will it be adapted? Will it be reinterpreted? But that was kind of the unification of 3 tax rules on June 7th. Everyone has a little bit of a different opinion, but obviously what we do is international tax. Most people's local accountants have no idea about international tax, and then they try and say, no, you know what you're talking about. You've seen this, right? I mean, they don't.
Yeah, I've seen it all the time. Yeah, most accountants or bookkeepers, they know the country they work in, and the cross-border, like between 2 countries, they never know. They say, I just know mine. I don't know that one. Right? That's what most say.
I had one of the top tax firms where I lived in Phoenix, Arizona, for domestic stuff. They were not cheap. But when I moved overseas, even the simplest thing, like the foreign earned income exclusion, where Americans can take, it's about $10,000 a month this year, tax-free from a company before you even have to get into the corporate structuring. They didn't even know. They're like, you don't qualify because you don't have, I think in that case, like you don't have a tax home. I was a digital nomad. So Americans actually benefit. Americans can still be digital nomads because they still are always taxed by the US. They just get to spend less time in the US as a digital nomad. They get like 1 month a year basically versus maybe 3 months a year if you have a fixed home. Australia is basically kind of unifying, and nobody ever hear, oh, I didn't hear about the newspaper. They say, this is going to apply to like a few thousand people. It's not going to be front page news. I mean, in the US, when Trump passed a sweeping tax reform a few years ago, it got a lot of news. I never saw a single article about how individual people like you and I, Mike, we're going to be swept into that tax system with a transition tax and with an ongoing tax. It changed the tax code for individual Americans operating overseas because it treated everybody the same as it treats Apple. And not a word was printed about that anywhere in the media ever. Nobody even knew it existed. People said, how dare you don't like America first? And I finally met Doug Casey, the international man, at our event in 2021. He said, yeah, Trump was bad for expats. Not a single word was printed about it. Because how many of guys like us are there?
That's true. It's like taxation without representation, they say almost, right? Because we're Americans overseas. Nobody listens to us. You know, like I go back to America. I haven't been back since 2018, February. You know, I entered a country and they say, why don't I live here? What am I doing? They like make me feel like a terrorist, man. They're like scary, right? They're like scary to me. I'm like, man, I'm not doing anything wrong.
I had an immigration attorney, and I shared this story for my friend. He lives in Thailand. He went back, and they said, we're putting him in a room. He said, why am I being detained for 3 hours? They said, we think you might have child pornography. And I was talking to the immigration attorney, but he said, oh yeah, they have this thing, like people who live in like Thailand, like they think that like that's why they're in Thailand, or the Philippines is one too. Like they have this impression, and they just screw with people. And so like, what a great privilege to be a citizen, pay tax, and when you go home, you know, they think you're a child pornographer.
Yeah.
It's pretty insulting to other countries.
It's really scary. Yeah.
Couple ways you can get a second citizenship. I mean, if you can qualify by descent, we've had a lot of Australian clients, for example, who had Greek ancestry. So by descent, I mean, if your parents are from some country, in almost every case, there's a few exceptions, you can be a citizen of that country. So if your mother was born in Canada, she's Canadian by default, you should be able to go and apply. Grandparents in many cases, great-grandparents in a number of cases, and now some countries even go even further back. Like if you have ancestors, as long as Italy existed, you can go back.
Man, you got to help me, man. I couldn't get it for Italy. I don't want to
probably because somebody gave it up before the next one was born.
Yes, my grandfather came to Ellis Island, for the American dream, and became American citizen before my father was born. I went to the Italian
Yep.
embassy in New York City, and I went through all the paperwork. I had all his birth certificates from Italy
Yep.
and all this stuff. They're like, "Oh, nope, can't do it. Your grandfather
Unbroken
became
chain.
American before your father."
Because back then there was no real dual citizenship. You became an American and then you kind of like forfeited the other one. And so they're like, well, so then when your father was born, they're like, well, there was nothing to give him. Right. But if you can prove that it always should have passed along, you can get it. Listen, my ancestors, I just, after 9 years, by the way, I just finally put the final nail in the coffin. I can't get Lithuanian, which is EU. So, if I'm EU, I can live anywhere in the EU. I can travel anywhere in the world pretty much. It's basically the same as Spanish or Italian or whatever else, because they left 2 years early. And also apparently because they were Jewish. So it's like, oh, great. But if you have someone from your family tree, it's worth evaluating. We do this for folks. We'll check your.
Maybe I need the other one I'm trying. I haven't tried so hard. Is I have Russian descent. My father's mother's Russian. My grandmother, and they said that she was a Jewish. I never knew her. But my friend says if I go to Israel and prove that my grandmother was Jewish, I can get Israeli passport.
So obviously both of those have a certain toxicity to them, I suppose. Israel's kind of cracking down on wanting you to spend time and live there, and that's pretty tax unfriendly if your goal is tax savings. I mean, Russia, obviously, they're really giving people a lot of problems. My sisters were all adopted from Russia, and it's for the first time ever. I'm like, maybe don't get your passports. So yeah, check your family tree. We can talk offline, but check your family tree.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Some of them, like the UK, it's basically just like you have to have a parent, but some of them go back 4 generations. The big ones would be Europe and also Latin America and the Caribbean. So we had a guy who was Trinidadian. We had, Barbadian. We had actually a guy from St. Kitts and Nevis. So option number 2 is you can go to St. Kitts and Nevis and give them $150,000 and they give you citizenship. It's a pretty good passport. You're not going to the US or Australia with it, but you can go most other places. Again, I think if you're living in Asia, doing business in Asia, that's probably going to be more accepted in the years to come. And they're not going to tax you because St. Kitts doesn't tax people who live in St. Kitts, let alone their own citizens. So, that's what, citizenship by investment. You can make a donation, or Turkey's the one where if you do it properly, you can actually make it an investment by buying real estate or by putting money in the bank for 3 years, and then you can get out of your investment. And again, if you're willing to move, then you can naturalize by getting residence in. Again, I think Ireland's a good one. A lot of countries in Europe deliver, but they don't have the mix of tax friendliness, English speaking. If you move to Germany, it's 8 years, soon to be 5 years. But there's, restrictions on dual citizenship. You have to learn German to a very high standard. Like you have to adapt. Ireland to me or Latin America are the ones if you're willing to move. Don't count on Asia. You had a program which might be coming back, actually, we just heard this week in Portugal. If you're not a European citizen, you can invest in the Golden Visa. We'll see what the options are. It'll be somewhere in the mid 6 figures. You spend a week there, you learn Portuguese to a basic standard, and in 5 years, you apply for citizenship. Here's the challenge on why I'm speaking highly of Ireland. I've been waiting 2.5 years to get my Portugal Golden Visa. I did my biometrics, and they're just taking their time. So it's kind of like hard to put your faith in that. Cyprus had a program. Like a lot of countries have closed their programs in the wake of the war. Do I think it's a huge, vast conspiracy that they want to shut down your options? Not entirely, but I think that the U.S. has been on record saying we don't like people having so many options. So Caribbean, you donate money, you get citizenship in 6 months. Do you need that right now? Only if you're an American and you want to not be an American. But I think if you can afford it, if that's like 5% of your income or 10% of your income or 5% of your net worth, it wouldn't be the worst thing to do. I've gotten 5 different passports besides the US, which I got rid of. And I can tell you it's come in a lot of handy for traveling during COVID, for doing business, for getting residence permits issued, for just avoiding bureaucracy in some countries where the US, for example, would have caused that, for keeping taxes low. I don't think any of my countries are going to follow me around the world and tax me because if I don't live there. If I live in the country, maybe they'll tax me. But if I don't live there, they won't. And so I put less credence in Europe these days outside of Ireland, by descent, by investment, or by moving. That's how I would do it. If you have any quick question, we can go through one quick question on that, and then we'll go through kind of the tax side. If there are any
There's actually quite a bunch of good questions, but I don't want to interrupt you. But we got
Okay,
about 5
we'll
or
go
6.
through it, and then we'll sure. So I think that's what I would be doing on the preventive side. If I'm an American and I don't want to be an American at some point, and I just think, I mean, we had a client, he just wants to only be in Asia. You don't need a great passport to be able to travel around Asia. You get a residence permit in one, Turkish passport, you can pretty much get into every country as a tourist. Or, Grenada or Dominica, you can go to China without a visa, for example. So maybe that's a passport they have if you're always going to China. Armenia, if you're Armenian descent, we've helped people get that. You can go to China. Serbia might be opening up a fast track. If you want to move to Serbia for a year, let's see if they pass the law. You could potentially, without learning Serbian, get Serbian citizenship. Now you can go to China, visa free. All good passports to consider having. That's the preventative side. If I'm Australian, British, Dutch, whatever, if I can have a second passport, Dutch can't, but if everyone else, I can, I want to have that preventative piece. And so, if I can pay, some thousands of dollars to get my, passport through my ancestry, that's a slam dunk. When it comes to low six figures, obviously that requires a bit more belief. But I think that, we had a guy who had 4 Western passports. When Trump passed this law, he had 2 weeks to decide if he wanted to be a U.S. citizen or not. And he struggled. And, I don't want someone to be in a situation. He struggled making the decision. Everyone else couldn't make the decision because they didn't have a second passport. And so I think he ended up paying like $1 million more than he could have, by being more prepared. And so I would be prepared because I think you can see higher taxes. How do you reduce your taxes to begin with? That's what I call the tax-free or tax-friendly quadrant. So there's 4 conditions. 2 of them are based on you. 2 of them are based on the business. 2 of them are based on leaving. 2 of them are based on arriving. So you need to figure out where you're leaving on the personal side. So that's where the Australian piece or the U.S. piece comes in. If you're an Australian citizen, I think the trend pretty soon is going to be you need to leave. You need to find a place you're going to live at least 6 months a year and pay tax. Now, if you live in Dubai, for example, paying tax means you don't pay tax, but you're liable for tax according to Australian standards. And then you need to keep your time in Australia minimum, right? If you're German, for example, it's a little bit easier, but there's still a lot of boxes to check. Canada, there's like 66 different boxes you should consider checking, or at least check most of them, that, hey, I'm out for Canadian purposes. So you need to figure out when you're leaving. You also need to figure out where your business is leaving. I talked to a guy the other day. He left the UK, but the business is still there. And then he thought he still had to pay personal tax because his business was still there. They're different. If you've got a company in the UK, it's going to pay UK tax. But if you don't live in the UK, according to the standards, you don't pay personally. I can start a company in the UK and it will be taxed the same as any other UK company or a US C Corp. If you're raising venture funding, people go and set up Delaware C Corps. They pay tax. That's a US tax nexus. An LLC is different. But if you have a corporation in one of these countries, it doesn't mean you have to pay tax personally if you no longer are liable. But ideally, if you don't need that business in the UK, why wouldn't you move it out? Because most people have a business in Australia or the US because they lived there. And that's just what you do. But if I'm going to be doing business online, why isn't my company in Hong Kong or a free zone in the UAE? Or I don't think Singapore's as attractive. I guess Labuan in Malaysia for some people is interesting. But, Hong Kong is probably a good one if you think China's all right. And I think maybe there's a geopolitical diversification element there with China. But you should leave, and then your company should leave, but they're different things. And if your company leaves, do I have assets to sell? You can't just take a very successful company and say, I'm shutting it down, and I'm moving it over here. You may have assets to sell, IP or customer lists or whatever else that you just sell to your new company. How do you value that as little as possible to where you pay as little tax on the exit as possible? On the personal side, some countries have exit taxes. You've got a business worth $2 million, you should pay a capital gains tax. How do you pay that? It's easier to leave before you have big capital gains. That could be from a business, from crypto, from stocks. The more money you have, the harder it is to leave because you have to potentially pay on any unrealized gains you have. A business worth $2 million that was started with 0 is an unrealized gain in many countries. So how are you leaving? How is your business leaving? And then where are you arriving? Again, if you're an American and you want to spend more than 1 month back in the US every year, you should ideally be living, none of this is formal tax advice, but you should ideally be living in one place. and you should have a tax residence there. And you should at least have plenty of connections there. I may not have to be tax resident, but there should be a preponderance of evidence that you're living in one place and that's your home. If you want to be a digital nomad, fine, but that's going to be a different situation. So where are you going to be arriving? Do you want to be a digital nomad? Do you want to live my trifecta lifestyle, 3 different countries, 4 months a year? Do you want to move to one place and just travel? That's going to all determine where you pay tax. Obviously, you can move to any high tax country, but ideally Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand are all more relatively tax-friendly places in Asia. The UAE, Ireland, Malta, Cyprus, UK, Greece, Italy, and Portugal all have tax exemptions. Switzerland is a very expensive tax exemption. Chile has tax exemptions. There's lots of countries that have different levels of tax exemptions, tax loopholes, whatever you want to call them. But where it is that you're moving? If you live in 3 places 4 months a year each, it depends on what those countries are. If it's Colombia, Montenegro, and Malaysia, none of them are going to tax you. But now I go back to, is that good enough for the place that you left? I have a friend from Norway and another friend from Finland. They, along with Mexicans, have to live in a certain list of countries for the first 3 years when they're leaving, or else life gets nasty. So that their country kind of restricts them where they go for the first 3 years. Mexico, Norway, and Finland are the ones I'm aware of. So where are you arriving, right? I mean, for him, he had to arrive in Portugal. He had another choice. He'd like to go to Dubai, but he can't. So where are you arriving and in what way? If you want to, again, live my trifecta lifestyle, 3 different countries, maybe one of them taxes you because there's a preponderance of time. If it's Spain, maybe they'll step in and say, hey, you spent enough time here, we'll tax you if you don't pay it somewhere else. But again, how does that play with where you left? And then the last part is, where's your business arriving? This is where most people focus on. They just think, I left Australia, I never said anything, but I'm gone, and I moved the company to the UAE. By the way, I had a guy the other day, his income all comes from royalties. The UAE doesn't help with that. There's no tax treaty with the US and the UAE for his YouTube and music royalties. He's going to pay more in the UAE than he would living in Ireland, for example, or Thailand, because there's no tax treaty on royalty tax reduction. He's going to pay the top rate. But he thought, oh, Dubai, set up a company, you're done. Hardly. So this is the hardest part of, where do you put your company? And probably if you're doing sourcing, like we had guys who they do e-commerce, they have to collect money through Afterpay, for example, and they want a certain company structure. And then what they'll do is the entrepreneur will say, well, I need a US or an Australian structure or whatever. That's where Afterpay will pay me. Just as an example. Maybe it's not the case anymore, but no, that should be a billing company. And you should pay 2% of that company's revenue and tax, and then move the rest of it to the offshore structure by establishing there's no other nexus in the billing company. But people think, I'll just keep this Australian company because I have to have it for this reason. And you don't. I mean, you might have to have multiple places where your company is going, or you might need to move 98% of your business overseas, but keep the structure in your company just to collect some customer payments. So this is where the complications come in, but you have to factor all 4 of those quadrants. If you miss one, it's not going to work. So happy to take any questions on that from you, Mike.
Okay. Great.
So that's, and then I think we got one more piece here. Obviously, if we're here, we understand, people are competing for our business. Countries are competing for our business. The UAE did impose a corporate tax rate. If you follow a certain set of rules, you can still use the free zone companies at 0. Those are still competitive. I do think Hong Kong and UAE are probably some of our most popular ones now. If you want to live in Europe, Italy is more open to where you're structured. So if you live in Italy, they've got like a lump sum tax you can pay. That may be easier than Portugal's tax regime, which is where you start getting companies in Malta and stuff like that. So living in Europe definitely adds a layer of complexity. Ireland and Italy are 2 of the easier ones to live in that are tax friendly, that allow you to work towards citizenship. Ireland more easily. If you want to live in Asia, where it's more, easygoing in terms of the rules, then the UAE and Hong Kong are still the most popular ones. We are doing some stuff with the Isle of Man. We think the Cayman Islands is needlessly pretentious and overcomplicated. Bahamas has kind of suffered a blow from the FTX thing. So I think Isle of Man, UAE free zones, Hong Kong are still among the most popular places. We do BVI sometimes, depending on the kind of structure, Virgin Islands. We're not doing the Seychelles. I saw one of our free zones in the UAE. We're opening up Seychelles companies. Like, what is it, 1972? I mean, don't have Marshall Islands, Seychelles, Belize, throw them in the trash. You can't bank with them almost anywhere. I mean, good luck. So those are where you can set it up. But we have employees all over the world. So we have staffing companies. You can use EORs. I'm sure some people here use EORs like Deal to employ people. But, if I hire someone in Germany for 15 months, they're an employee, whether I like it or not. And I'm going to be taxed to some level based on having a nexus in Germany. So you might set up a staffing company. We have people in Georgia, for example. We've got a Georgian company, and then the operating company pays the Georgian company. We pay a little bit of tax on top of the payroll taxes, and it segregates those people in their work from the operating company's profits and taxes. So I put out a video a couple of weeks ago on it's called my perfect offshore structure, the 4-part offshore structure. Do you need a holding company or a trust? That's up to you for asset protection. I think a lot of entrepreneurs probably over romanticize that stuff. You need an operating company. You may need the subsidiaries to collect payments, and you may need a staffing company that employs people in certain countries to where you don't get in trouble or have their work basically have a physical or a permanent establishment for your, let's say, UAE company. You don't want a permanent establishment somewhere else. The ultimate kiss of death is having like salespeople in the US and some other Western countries. You will be taxed. I don't care if you're in Hong Kong. I don't care if you're in the UAE. You will be taxed in the US. We don't hire people, generally speaking, in the US for that reason. I would never hire a salesperson, but even other people, it's like that could be a tax nexus. I don't want that.
Got it.
And if you live in the US, then forget it. I mean, if you live in Australia, forget it. I mean, you can't use offshore companies. They'll be considered a CFC if you live in the country. So you've got to live offshore to the satisfaction of wherever you're living, to where they're considering you out of the tax net, or at least foreign income qualifying if you're US. And you've got to make sure you don't create other things that get in the way. So it's about 45 minutes. I mean, we could go into this for hours.
No. I mean, I think it's good. I think we can go into the questions. There was unless you want to add more, but yeah, there's some good ones. I think I'll start it, or let me show them on stage. So there's a Q&A tab, but I guess Joan, she's also in some of our Web3 stuff. I guess she's Australian and doesn't know what's happening in Australia, but I think you talked about that.
Let me just talk about this real quick, and I'll get to the question.
Please talk about your events. Yes.
Obviously, we work with the clients on this stuff on an ongoing basis. And I think we have kind of a premium offering because I believe that, from my own situation, there's a lot of complexity. And a lot of other people, they do too. I'm just moving to Dubai and my problems are solved. I found 4 holes in that guy's strategy in about 60 seconds. He's actually going to pay more living there. For folks who are here, I think, I've been to Mike's events before and he did a good job. We're sending someone to Mike's event this year.
Yeah. Thanks for your support.
We're putting together an event that I think, for what the stuff we're talking about, if you're not sure what to do, or you're trying to gather ideas, or you're trying to maybe dispel all the misconceptions, we're having an event in Kuala Lumpur. It's at one of my favorite hotels in the world, the Majestic. It's this September 6th through 9th. We have a $1,500 discount now. If you want to bring friends, business partners, lovers, what have you, it's like 80% off the main price for persons 2, 3, and 4. It is a bit more of an expensive event. We don't take sponsors. No one can pay to speak. In our space, in the offshore space, most events are every single person paid to speak, or there's some 15% commission on the back end, which if you're selling real estate, for example, a 15% commission is ridiculous. We don't even get into that stuff. But if you want to go, promo code is Michelini, Mike's last name. Go to nomadcapitalist.com/live and just enter that code. We have some great people talking about crypto. We have people talking about, mostly our own R&D staff on tax issues, personal and business, immigration, whether it's, low level, high level, golden visas, passports. We don't talk about it anywhere publicly. I mean, basically every part of global citizenship is covered at the event. And I think it's a great way to dip your toe in for folks here who are Asia centric. It's in Kuala Lumpur, which is nearby. It's a great place. You're very close to Singapore. If you wanted to go there and open bank accounts or stuff like that. But our events really, years ago we hosted events and maybe there were some folks who were like, We've held 2 events called Nomad Capitalist Live in Mexico the last 2 years. I don't know of anybody who their head didn't explode with information. And that's why I don't take sponsors. That's why we don't allow anyone to pay to speak, because I want it to be, we just jam pack it with everything you need to know. So the stuff we're talking about today, I wish we could go on for hours and hours, but if you're looking to kind of learn how this stuff works, and be able to come to a Q&A and ask questions of our strategy team that does this for the clients, I think it's a worthy investment of a couple $1,000s. If you don't live in Asia, for someone from the US, come to Prince Court Medical Center and get your $300 soup to nuts medical exam, as I just did.
Medical checkup.
Amazing. If you're not from the region, $300, they look you up top to bottom, and you actually get to talk to the doctor. The savings, it's like 10 grand in the US. You'll pay for the ticket, you'll pay for the trip. But anyway, we'll get to your questions. But if you like anything about global citizenship, at least just check out nomadcapitalist.com/live. If you book it, please use promo code Michelini. You get your $1,500 discount. You get the discount on everybody add. I think it's a great entree to folks who may be already doing this stuff, but want to tighten up their strategy, or if you want to start, or if you're missing the citizenship part, rather than coming on board as, let's say, a client. This way you kind of get your ducks in a row first and figure out what you're lacking and help to kind of hone your strategy in person. It's Q&A. It's hundreds of like-minded people. And so I'd love to have the group come in and join us for that. And we got a big speaker, by the way, Mike, on July 1st. We're announcing just days away.
Okay. I can't wait, man. Yeah, I linked in the Michelini. Awesome. Yeah, I linked it also. But yeah, it's an easy one to remember. nomadcapitalist.com/live. Live in the flesh. Someone's actually asking where your office is. I said, I think you're completely remote, right? I mean,
so we have, I guess, technically an office. We got one guy in Dubai who works at the Free Zone there. We have buildings that we bought we had a very Eastern European focus because it was good English, it was affordable. People had some get up and go. So we own offices kind of like right off the main squares in Belgrade, in Tbilisi, Georgia, and in Yerevan, Armenia. I think we're going to kind of pivot away from two of those and still keep some of the people, but working at home. But we've kind of been expanding the team more internationally. So we're all over the place. And then we're opening up a space in Ireland. We've got, I think, 6 people there so far. And we're going to figure out how to open that office. So, I mean, the headquarters are in Dubai. We have a presence still in Hong Kong, but nobody works there. We have a U.S. entity as well. Nobody works there. So it's kind of like the ultimate flag theory, as they would call it. It's have your companies in places that are convenient, but have your workforce somewhere else. So we do own 3 office buildings, not the whole building, but office spaces, and we have a couple others that we lease, and so it's an evolution. We're consolidating. There's no real place people come and like knock on the door. Hello, can I come in? I mean, obviously we, what we do, I'm sure some people think you shouldn't have the right to lower your taxes,
Yeah, there's those crazy people. I mean, even in my family, it's like that, honestly.
I don't know. We want people just coming in like, no, I don't think we like a big sign or something. I mean, it's not a secret to the clients where we are, but I don't know. We want people coming in like knocking on the door.
Yeah, I agree. I met PayPal in Hong Kong and I said, "Where's your office?" They're like, "We can't tell people because they'll the death threats."
Yeah. I never had a problem with PayPal, but everyone else has a problem with PayPal.
Yeah, I have problems with PayPal.
I would do it with PayPal US. I wouldn't be doing PayPal Hong Kong. I think this is where you need a multi-part structure probably. If I have a Hong Kong company, I want to have like a US or European company to run my PayPal through and save myself 3%. It's probably worth it. So anyway, because Hong Kong PayPal is really squirrely.
Yeah, I mean they can just steal your money because they're not a bank, right? So they can just take your money. That's how we never had them do that, but like we can't even close our account, and so we have to like audit it every year, like to be conservative. And it's just like at least in the US they let you close it. So my advice would be just have a 2-part structure if you're in Hong Kong and do your payment processing elsewhere. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. So I think we talked about the Australia one. So Mark, I guess you was just learning about that. I think the simple answer is what they're doing is they're just consolidating various rulings. It's kind of very boring tax stuff. And obviously we have tax attorneys and CPAs that we work with. I mean, we're kind of a general contractor. I'm not like a tax attorney myself, but obviously we talked to these guys for so many years. What it is we had a bunch of rulings that define what's a resident, and we've merged them together and we've made some changes. And the basic interpretation from a number of international tax people in Australia is this is basically saying that we're going to start saying if you're a digital nomad, that may not be enough to break the residency test. There's 4 tax tests in Australia. One is the days test, which people commonly misunderstand in Australia and other countries. They think
oh, 183 days in a year, I'm a tax resident. They then think the opposite is true. By the way, there are some situations if you go to the US and you spend 7 months and you've got a closer connection somewhere else, you may be able to not pay tax even though you failed the days test. But people think the opposite of the days test is true. If you're under 183, that somehow you're home free. And that's not really it, because there's all the other tests that also instruct it. And if you're from Australia, for example, or from Canada, and you're 182 in Canada, and then you're 3 months here and 3 months there, Canada's still the number one place. And you're assumed almost to have been from there because like that's where you've been living. So you really have to show them, I'm really leaving and living 6 months there, but 1 day less, and then 3 months here. Like they're like, yeah, you didn't really leave. That's not enough for us. And so there's 4 tests in Australia, and they kind of strengthen how they look at the residency rules. I'm sure some people will disagree, and some have, but all of our
guys, I mean, it's like the thing. There's always some people say taxes is a negotiation with the government. It's kind of like a negotiation.
By the way, that did come up. Oh, you can get a private ruling, and it's like, do you want to spend the next 5 years in court with the tax man because that wasn't really the former. It's now at the. I mean, come on.
Got it. Okay, well, let's go to Soon. She is asking. She's from Canada, and her accountant told her she doesn't have to pay taxes if she's away from Canada for 2 years.
Well, you think like away as in not coming back at all?
She's in the audience, I think, still, but it just says away from Canada for 2 years.
So the goal when you leave a country like Canada is to break the tax residence. But please, I'm not giving.
I think it's gonna be hard to go into big. She says.
So
yes,
I mean, the general rules are you have to break your tax residence, and so I mean, the longer you're away, the better. The less time you spend, the better. I think what people get into trouble is when they try and like ride the line. If you're an American, you can also move to Puerto Rico. You've got to meet one of 3 tests. Well, you've got to meet 3 tests, and you've got to do it in one of 3 ways. And so, people who are like, I'll just do the bare minimum, that's going to be a problem. So if it's like, oh, leave forever and never come back for 2 years, I guess. But there's other factors besides just your physical presence. Do you have a home, for example? I remember we had a case where we were really talking to the lawyers about like a person had like a log cabin for the summer. Like, is that a house? And it's an issue for some folks. They don't want to cancel their lease. They don't want to rent out or sell their home. So there's other factors. But I guess if you leave a country for 2 years, that's a pretty strong indication you don't want to come back. That said, you can get back into a tax net. I think I could go to Australia now, and if I overstay my visa or something, and I spend too long, I could be taxed. It's not like you can't get back into it.
So I guess she's asking what country she has to pay tax if she's not in Canada. She has no assets there, but I feel like it's a little bit specific. I don't know. I know it's already almost at the 1 hour mark, Andrew.
I'll just quickly tell you. There's different ways to do it. And what's interesting is that, again, there's individual circumstances based on how many ties you have to the country. Again, now Australia is saying maybe it won't even matter how many ties. That was what was in the ruling. It may not even matter how many ties you have to Australia if we don't like the way you're handling the residence part of the test. So it depends. But, for example, in some countries, you can go to some countries and you can spend a month, pay them $20,000, and then be a tax resident. But you can't spend more than 6 months anywhere else. So if you're a digital nomad, that's a tax residence. Our interpretation with our tax guy's interpretation was Australia is not going to be so open to that anymore, right? So that's a place where technically you're paying tax to give you a tax resident certificate. You tell your bank, I pay tax in this place. There's even a country where you spend like 1 day per year there, and actually they're tightening their rules. But 1 day per year, as long as you have some money or some income, they'll give you tax residence. And then again, you can't spend 6 months somewhere else. But that may not apply to everybody in every situation. If you go and spend 6 months or more and you really make a home and you can make a case like this is my bona fide place of living, generally speaking, that's probably good enough as long as you clear up the ties on your departure. Then the issue is if I want to go somewhere for 6 months, where's that going to be? It has to be a tax-friendly place, either tax-free like the UAE, territorial tax, which has some restrictions like a Thailand. You can't remit money under certain circumstances, non-dom like in Ireland, tax exclusion like Italy or Greece more like Portugal, a lump sum like Switzerland or Italy or Greece. There's 5 different ways you can move, 5 different types of tax scenarios you could move to, and you could spend the entire year there if you want to and pay 0 or some predefined amount. So that works. You have to pick any of those.
Got it.
And then again comes into I have royalty income from YouTube, from book sales, from music. Okay, well now I want a tax treaty, and does my country have a tax treaty? Some do. There's a lot of factors.
Got it. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Four more. I don't know.
Yeah, you hit me, bro.
So Mohammed says, "Hi Andrew, I know you're a fan of Malaysia. I'm wondering if there's any point to Malaysian passports since benefits are more relevant to higher income individuals." I'm Malaysian, by the way.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get Malaysian passport. Oh, does he have a Malaysian passport?
He's already Malaysian. I guess he's just curious about foreigners in his country. I know you're a fan of Malaysia. I'm wondering if there's a point to the Malaysian passport since most benefits that are more relevant to higher income individuals are open to foreigners.
Oh, right. I forget, I forget some of the things. We've had some people who, like, their wife is Malaysian or they used to be Malaysian, they became Australian. So I honestly, I forget exactly like what rights. I feel like you get some kind of permanent residence in certain cases, or like they look at you like you can keep your MyCAD, like your ID. I feel like there's something you can hold on to and they don't really care. I feel like Malaysia also isn't very strict on enforcing the no dual citizenship. I mean, I know Malaysians who have 3 passports, and I feel like as long as you don't flaunt it, they almost kind of tell you they don't care. Some of the border guys, like, just don't show us that. I mean, if you were to get Maltese citizenship, they report to your country of tax residence, and so that probably would trigger somebody in Putrajaya, I guess, to say you're canceled. I mean, a Malaysian passport's great. They're not going to bother you no matter where you live. I mean, I think the only country you need a visa to is basically the U.S., maybe Canada. I'm not sure. So a great passport. I mean, do I want insurance against that? I'd want less insurance against Malaysia than against Australia or Canada. I feel like if you're a Malaysian and you ever got tired of it, you just go and live somewhere else. I mean, Malaysia already doesn't tax foreign income, even of its own citizens. And I think there's a political reason for that. They've talked about kind of pulling that back in 2026, but I'm not convinced that all those politicians with money overseas are going to want to get rid of that. So I think being Malaysian is fine, but you're not going to become Malaysian, I don't think. And I wouldn't try to become Malaysian. I mean, I guess if you're a Kosovo football player and your passport trash, I would take it, but otherwise, just live there.
There used to be the MM2H, but that whole blow up. I heard. I know.
They raised the requirements a lot. You got to make like $9,000 a month, and you have to deposit like 200. I mean, the ringgit's down now, which is part of why it'll be a great time to come to our event, and everything's cheap. But it's like $9,000 a month in income, and like I'm estimating 210, 220 in the bank. It's not the end of the world, but I mean, it's more than it was.
Great. Okay, Julius Everett asked, I know Portugal ranked quite high on your passport index. I'd be curious to learn more about Portugal's golden visa requirements. Is real estate still an option?
Well, so they said they were canceling the golden visa this year. And now they're saying, okay, well, we're going to bring it back without the real estate because it's a political thing, right? People were complaining, as they are in many places in the world, foreigners are coming in, buying our property, and our prices are going up. So I think what they're probably going to keep is investment funds, which I always thought was one of the better ones anyway. And a lot of the investment funds do invest in various kinds of real estate. So it's kind of a way to get a more tax advantaged, more hands-off way to invest. So I think we'll see what they bring back. It seems like the investment funds may survive, and some of those are in real estate. We'll be talking about that in September, because I think the dust will have settled, and we're going to kind of lay out all the different golden visa options. If the goal was to get citizenship without living there, Portugal is really the only one that ever did that. If the goal was to live there and get citizenship, or to not live there and not need citizenship, then the other ones could work. Portugal is a good passport. I don't know that the EU is as likely to tax foreign citizens, especially like Portugal, which has like a diaspora, a history of immigration. They have kind of a maritime culture historically. It's a good passport. I've lost some confidence in them, honestly, in their ability to execute. So, I mean, if I say I'm going to make a decent investment that I think I can recover in 6, 8, 10 years, whatever the investment is, and I'm willing, and I have the optionality to live in Europe without the requirement to do more than 7 days a year, and I've got a decent chance at naturalization, and I'm willing to put up with some bumps along the way, it's not a bad option. But I would not look at it as a guarantee. Caribbean citizenship, Turkish citizenship is guaranteed. CBD, once you qualify, is probably guaranteed.
Okay, thank you so much. Austin saying, what's your take on passport by lineage for Poland? I think he's saying in parentheses, great-grandfather, last descendant, I believe.
I think great-grandparents are allowed for Poland. To be honest, I have some team members who are much more up on the CBDs, and they're the ones who are talking about it at the event. I mean, they're going to cover it. Obviously, we do that service as a standalone. You could just, call us. I thought at one point for certain people there was a language requirement, but it seems like a lot of times there isn't. So I don't remember everything about Poland. But I do believe great grandparents qualify for Poland if you meet the other conditions. And I think, I've had Polish people or people with Polish ancestry say, I don't want to live in Poland. Again, if you have a European Union member state citizenship, you can not only live in all the other ones, plus, Polish citizenship got better in the last year. You can now go to the US without a visa. So if you are some other Western citizen, that's a nice backup, which probably, again, Poland has a history of immigration to some extent. Are they as likely to make it impossible to leave? Probably not. And I think if you're European, even if they did make it impossible to leave, they would make it possible to leave within the other countries. And you'd always have an Ireland who says, okay, come here and don't pay much tax. Or Malta, okay, come here and don't pay much tax. So you have options, I think, that other people don't. I'd be Polish, sure, why not? And cool. Great grandparents should qualify. Yeah.
Thanks. And last one, but not least, Homer Simpson.
Oh.
Which country outside USA has lowest yearly registration fee for setting up corporation does not have tax or audits for a purely equity holding company?
Oh, well, the UAE now has these audits, even in some of the free zones. So, I think audits are becoming a thing. The US LLC, for example, is obviously very cheap to set up in some states. Some of them never have any ongoing fees at all, other than like a registered agent.
Yes, he says outside US, so, but
well,
that's the thing I've learned too. Like outside US, they have higher, maybe lower tax, but they have us like audits and upkeeps, like Hong Kong.
Well, it's like, why do some things cost so much? Because they're worth it, right? I recently made an offer on a house that was like 30% cheaper than all the other houses. And I thought, okay, I can renovate this. And it turns out it was going to cost 3 million euros to renovate this house. And it's like 2 million more than I thought than I was hoping. And it's like, yeah, that's the reason it's so cheap. And yet it's still too expensive. So, if I'm an American, a US LLC alone is not enough. If I'm not an American, I still think, given some of these residency rules, just having an LLC on its own is a problem. So, I don't know. I guess the offshore jurisdictions like the BVI aren't that expensive to me. Belize, I guess, but it's trash. I think you're paying for a combination of low tax, efficiency, reputability. Those are all important. So what's a UAE free zone? If you want to be in the fancy ones, it's expensive. If you want to be in one of the cheaper ones, it's, I don't know, $4,000 a year or something. It's money well spent. Hong Kong, the audits are the issue, right?
But listen, I guess they call it, nobody likes audits, yeah.
Listen, there are times I have a company in the BVI for purely holding equities. There are some conditions to meet, but there's not an audit yet. So if all I'm doing is just holding stocks, if it means like stocks, fine. If all I'm doing is holding my shares in a certain, fine. Something like that could work. But if you plan to okay, I have a thing now where can you send me dividends? We have a bank in the US that's willing to, in some cases, open for their existing account holders, accounts for foreign companies. It's pretty rare. Try getting a bank account for a BVI company. Singapore has pretty much gotten rid of those. Maybe Switzerland if you pay them 6,000. But now you're paying. I was quoted 12,000 francs a year to have an account in Switzerland. So much for cheap, right? So, do you need to receive a dividend payment or some money? I wouldn't so. It depends. Maybe the BVI could work in some cases, but even we've had guys with crypto holding. They just want to hold crypto, and all right, the Marshall Islands, fine, whatever. Nobody cares because the exchange doesn't care. You just need to title it somewhere. But I think generally speaking, it's a problem.
Great. You're getting lots of thank yous. Well, to me too, but people are all happy with these your answers, like Julius and Mohammed. Many. There's one last chat question from Fernando. Maybe if you want to squeeze, he's asking, any countries offering interesting passports in exchange for investments in local REITs versus directly buying real estate?
I'll give you a salesy answer on that, because all the other answers, the reality is we could probably answer the question for 2 or 3 hours on end with all the different permutations. On this question, I'll say there are countries where you can make, I don't know about REITs. Ireland just closed the IIP, which had an exclusive 2 million euros in REITs, and then you get access. But you don't need to do that to live in Ireland. You just need to start a company and hire one person. That's much more efficient than putting 2 million into REITs. We're going to be talking about at the event what I call the paper residences, where you make some kind of bank deposit or real estate investment, and you don't necessarily have to live there. We're really trying to put those out publicly, which is part of why we don't record the event, because Paraguay had something like that. And it got abused because it was just out there for everybody. And now it's tough. And that was a good passport to have. So, I mean, we'll be talking about some of those. REITs in particular, I'm trying to think, maybe some version of a REIT. I don't know, it should be on the tip of my tongue. But real estate, bank accounts, investment accounts, bond accounts, those are all possible from 20,000, 50,000, 200,000. So that's the kind of stuff we'll be talking about. And I think it's a great opportunity for someone to come. That, by the way, that's like a 30-minute presentation, just so you know, at the
yeah.
We talk about these kind of exclusive, like these kind of like weird passports where you put 50 grand and kind of come back in 3 years. Obviously, they could change the rules in those countries, so it's maybe a good idea to have a couple of them rather than like banking. Yeah. Like my only hope of escaping Australian tax is that this one country does what they promise, but that's half an hour out of 4 days of materials. So you can imagine how much we're going to talk about.
Yeah, plus plus the hallway chats and the other people there. I'm coming, Andrew, so I'm locking in my ticket. So yeah,
I think it's going to be truly. We have a certain marketing angle, as I know you do, but for me, this is all about the customer experience, which is again why I don't want sponsors. I don't want some sponsor telling me what I'm supposed to say or not say. So it's kind of like, do you want to be the customer or do you want to be the product? We're talking about exhibiting for the first time at an event this year. All their money is made from sponsors and exhibitors. It's like, how am I getting any good information? Like you're just basically paying to be sales pitched. So anyway.
Yeah, getting lots of good. Yeah, Fernando seems like he says he'll have to come to find the rest. Seems like he'll be there.
I was saying, you got to have a little. I mean, I was saying, for all the entrepreneurs here, people might say, "Oh, your business has decent margins." And I said to myself, if you wanted to go and if you went to some guy where we're from, Mike, in the U.S., and you said, "Hey, do you want to spend 12 years of your life going through some of the hellholes of the world and then employing people to do the same to figure out?" It's like, if you had to pay someone what the average person would need to be, I'd have zero margin at all, right? I mean, there's something to be said about. I think there's a lot of opportunities in lesser known markets, but it's very opaque. I think hopefully we'll clear up some of that and give you some good stuff at the event. And obviously we put out daily content on YouTube. So I appreciate your having me, though.
No, it's fun. We had fun. These are fun. Great stuff. And I'll see you there. Look, we haven't met in years, so I'll see you there.
Thanks for supporting
Cross-border Summit too after in November. So it's a good combo. And thanks for I always love our exchanges, and thanks for sharing, especially all this extra time and getting everybody's questions. And everybody's really happy. So thank you, thanks, Andrew.
Guys.
Thank you everybody for your time.
Always good to have you, Mike.
Cheers. And thank you to our sponsor, our returning sponsor, Mercury.com, online bank. Well, it's a real bank, but you can do it totally online for US. Our Blimp program participants are going through this as well. Thank you, Mercury. Travis is great there. He's been on our show. He's been in our events. We're going to have another event where we will have them attending as well. And if you want to get a little bonus for you and us, if you sign up and do some special circumstances, you can go to globalfromasia.com/Mercury. I also have a video tutorial that we use even for the Blimp people. I use the same exact video to learn how to use it. I hope you can check it out. Totally free. Why not? See you there. All right. Thank you, Andrew, for sharing. That was a really in-depth one, all around the world, talking about business and personal taxes and citizenships and residencies, and answering various questions from the live audience at the webinar at Global from Asia. So thanks so much, Andrew. Actually, both Nomad Capitalist and Global from Asia is about the same age, 10 years each. So that's really cool. And, of course, you could use his services for your own specific help, like some pretty specific questions even during the webinar. He does services to help you out. Also, he's got the live event September 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. You can also meet up with me there. They're also supporting Cross-Border Summit, sending somebody to our events November 16th and 17th in Chiang Mai, Thailand. Lots of cool stuff happening in Asia, lots of cool stuff happening in the world of cross-border trade, online business, I guess you can say digital nomads. But basically, we are the new world order. Referenced that in the talk, but we are the future, I think we have to keep our minds open. We have to keep trying new things, learning new things, being aware of the changes in the world between countries and policies. And there's so much happening. There's something I'll be announcing soon. It will actually already be online as the show goes online, about a new project and protocol we're building on the load pipe. You guys might have heard that over the years. It's going to change everything we do here. It's going to change everything in the world, we're pretty sure about. And I'll be sharing that in the future. But thanks again for watching episode 404, globalfromasia.com. Find the show notes there. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you to our sponsors, CrossBetter Logistics, which we use ourselves. Thank you to Mercury for being one of our cornerstone podcast sponsors over the years. We also use them for our cross-border payments in the U.S. and our online banking. Thank you for everybody for supporting this. Thank you for our team editing this and making this go live. I think our team is doing amazing work. Thank you, Alvin, LJ, Ann, Manly, Stephanie, everybody. We got so much to do. It's halfway through the year. I am sweating. I got to turn the fan back on after this recording is done. Thanks again. And we got so much to do. So much to do. Take care.
To get more info about running an international business, please visit our website at www.globalfromasia.com. That's www.globalfromasia.com. Also, be sure to subscribe to our iTunes feed. Thanks for tuning in.